out there. Welcome to Tripping on Legends. My name is Christopher Balzano, and you are listening to episode 124, The Battle of the Two Dolls. We originally had another episode scheduled for today, but we decided to go a different way because, as you can see, if you are watching on Facebook or Instagram, I am alone tonight. I am the Lone Ranger. There is no Deanna. We had a few episodes that I've got specifically planned that involve talking about places we're going to go, so I wanted to keep those for when I can actually get Deanna here in studio. And I don't have Ella, and Ella wanted to get involved in the episode that we originally had planned, and I had this one out there. Tripping on Legends episodes come to me like what to do in a lot of different ways. Sometimes I want to go to a location, or I want to go to an area of Florida. I think I haven't been there before, or we really need to touch that. We really need to kind of cross, or maybe I've done some research or something popped up. This episode came about because over the last few months, I've seen a very distinct, noteworthy, and I'm not going to say concerning trend, featuring the all-star of Florida, and that would be Robert the Doll. Let me tell you what this episode is not. This episode is not Tripping on Legends' journey into Robert the Doll, right? So it's not going to be like your typical, hey, here's Robert the Doll, here's the story of it, whoa, 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 spooky, spooky, thank you, good evening. It's not going to be that. We have an episode where I think we covered quite a bit of the legend. If you want to go into our archives, this would be a great time to resubscribe now that we've switched servers. You can find us on any music platform now, including Spotify, including iTunes. We did an episode called 0 Miles as the Crow Flies, which was our vacation that Natalie and I took in Key West, which we had to hit a few of the haunted legends out of there. Our primary focus of that, though, is the lighthouse, but there are segments about Robert the Doll because while we were there, Natalie and I kind of talked our way into the artist house. But I'll get to that in a little bit. This episode is also not a bashing of anyone in particular, nor is it an episode designed to do that horrible D word, which I consider like one of the dirtiest words out there. Any of the stories that are out there, or even, more importantly, the haunting of Robert the Doll, the curse of Robert the Doll, none of these things are my intention tonight. My intention is to, and people have a really hard time understanding this, being here with this. You can have a haunted legend, and you can say everything about that haunted legend is 100% not true. Whatever you're told, whatever you're being fed from the different media sources you get, whether it's books, whether it's YouTube videos, whether it's documentaries, whatever you get about it can be completely wrong. That doesn't mean that the place isn't haunted, and more importantly, it doesn't mean that the haunted legend isn't true. Haunted legends are true because people tell them. And people do a lot of talking about Robert the Doll. So he's a perfect example of a story that we need to look at all the different variations, right? Right now, the really big thing, just ask Marvel, is the multiverse. Robert the Doll is the multiverse, right? He's this tapestry that you can pull any thread and completely change the picture that you see, but it doesn't mean that any of the pictures are not true. Or more importantly, that they shouldn't be celebrated and that you shouldn't be freaked out by them. We call this show Tripping on Legends. We call this show Tripping on Legends because we make mistakes as well. So a lot of the things I'm going to talk about tonight, I tried to get the best information I possibly could to present to you guys. That means that all of it is true because someone somewhere is saying it. It also means that I'm probably going to mess up a few times to what you've heard. And what you've heard may be only a legend. It may be the inside track. And it's really interesting how so many people say they have the inside track. Or they heard this information directly from somebody. Or it's, they know the real story. They've heard it this way. And all of those are true. I'm probably going to make mistakes on dates and times and names. I know one name for sure. I'm almost 100% going to get something wrong having to do with it. But Robert is magnetic. He is one of those classic haunted stories. He falls into so many of the categories of things that we are scared of or that freak us out. He's a doll. Right? And fear of dolls does not begin with Robert the doll. But he kind of embodies, because of the popularity that he's gotten, he embodies that thing that we fear. I sometimes wonder whether Robert, if he is possessed by something, if Robert the doll has some kind of consciousness, whether he's over there like really, really pissed at Annabelle. Right? Because like Annabelle's taken all of his glory nowadays. It's funny how many kids 5-6 years ago you would ask them if they knew who Robert the doll was, and I'm talking my students in Florida, and about half of them would know who Robert the doll is. And now that number is significantly down, but they all know who Annabelle is. Robert is probably a little bit more down to earth. And he's definitely more long-lasting. We're talking, this is a legend that's over 100 years old. It all begins in 1904 when the Stiff Company, or Stiff Company, makes this doll. And it is about 4 feet tall, 3.5 feet tall. And it has this kind of abstract face. Back in the day, it said that it had a more colorful face, but all that color is kind of worn out of it. The company itself, or the claim is that this is a unique doll. There are no other Roberts. There are some dolls like Robert, but this one is mine. And yet, even that, there have been kind of like, different variations of. So how about if I just do it this way? I'll tell you the story the way that I tell it to people when I do events. And I do Robert quick. Because he's so kind of cliche, I do it quickly. But he's a draw, right? You can see up, if you're watching on Facebook Live or you're watching on Instagram, you can see that I've got my Robert the Doll painting right there on the wall. It's back up there. It's usually not up there. That was made by my friend Della, Daughtery. Usually, it's in my box of things that I take to events. Because you put Robert the Doll up, and people are automatically drawn to it. They want to talk about it. I am drinking out of my Robert the Doll cup that I got when we went there in 2017 as Tripping on Legends. This is one of those stories that people want to hear, and I give it to them because you give the people what they need, right? Like if you're a band and you're out there, you want to play stuff from your new album, but you got to throw out the hits too. And I usually use this story to tell another story because to me, everyone does a Robert the Doll. So the way I tell the story is this. Robert was given to his owner, Robert Eugene Otto, as a present from the housekeeper at the house. He lived in Key West in a house that's now known as the Artist House, and he absolutely loved this doll. The woman who gave him the doll was from Haiti, and she was also having an affair with Robert Eugene Otto's father. Immediately, Gene fell in love with the doll. He named the doll Robert. He gave it his name, and then he became known forevermore as Eugene or Gene. And he absolutely loved this doll. He brought it everywhere with him. He took it around. Now, at some point, the affair between his father and the housekeeper went south, and she was thrown out of the house. And as she was thrown out of the house, she put a curse on the doll. What that curse was, not exactly sure, but she put a curse on the doll. Almost immediately, the doll began to change. He had a reputation of setting fires through the house. He would move things. He would knock things over. He would take food out of the refrigerator, the ice box, and leave it out. He would rummage through things. He would throw through the clothes. And every time that Jean's parents saw this happening, they would obviously blame him. And he would say, Robert did it. Things got more and more intense. People began to claim that they could see Robert themselves running through the house. People would talk about how he became so obsessed that he would have whole conversations, and they would hear two very different voices, one voice which definitely was not Jean's. And while it might have been cute for a young Jean to be walking around the streets of Key West, a place where anything that you do that's weird is totally embraced, as he started to get older and into his teen years, he continued to walk around with the doll, and people started to talk about how weird he was. But he was an artist. And after graduating from school, he went to Europe to kind of perfect his craft. And while he was in Europe, he kept the doll in the attic. While the doll was in the attic, Jean's parents, would hear footsteps. They would hear scuttling across the attic floor. They would sometimes go into a room, and inexplicably Robert would be there, even though they had locked him in the attic, or they had put him in the attic. People began to say they would walk by the house and they would see Robert staring down from the attic window to the streets below. While in Europe, Jean fell in love, came back, moved back into the artist's house. His parents eventually bought another house and moved there, and him and his bride took over kind of control of the family house. But Robert found his way back into their lives, right? Jean would demand that Robert have a seat at the table with them during dinner, that he would make sure that the doll was placed in a secure location, watching the bed while they were sleeping and doing other things that people do in bed. Sometimes his wife would wake up to find Robert in the bed between them, but she hadn't felt Jean move or anything like that. And she began to get kind of freaked out by this, and she demanded that they move him. They demanded he go back in the attic, and Jean held off as long as he possibly could until eventually he gave in and he put the doll in the attic. But that wasn't the end of it, because once that doll was in the attic, it continued to escape. He would again be heard running around, be looking out the window, and it became too much. And then eventually, after they died, Robert continued to be in the attic. The new owners had to, as part of the lease that they signed, or the sales that they signed when they took over the house, they had to promise not to get rid of Robert and not to remove him from the attic. And when the new people moved in, they also had crazy experiences. Now, I was rereading one of my favorite books, Haunted Objects by Christopher Balzano and Tim Weisberg. And I totally had forgotten that this part of the story was told to me by the people who were running the tour. And that was that girl had found the doll, and she was attacked, right? She brought the doll down. She wanted to play with the doll. She did a whole kind of falling in love, kind of a little bit of obsession with it. And then one night it tried to choke her. and she was determined that Robert was going to try to kill her. Eventually, those people wanted to get rid of the doll. They either sold the house and the next people came in, or they intentionally donated it to the East Martello Museum, who in 1994 took possession of the doll, brought it to the old fort, and there it has been ever since. And the interesting thing is that you can go and see Robert, right? Back in the day, I went to go see him on my 10th wedding anniversary. And at that time, the only tour that you could go that actually allowed you to see Robert was Ghosts and Gravestones. Like, if you wanted to see Robert, you had to go on their ghost tour. They took you to all these places, told you the stories. You've all been on ghost tours, especially trolley tours, maybe even from that company. And then you got in, and they let you hang out with Robert for a little bit and conduct paranormal experiments and see if you could, talk to him and get EVPs, and everyone was given a K2 meter and all this stuff like that. And then you went on your way. And you had to learn the Robert's rules, right? So Robert's rules, which pretty much haven't changed, at least in the time that he's been at the museum. Number one, you have to say hello. Number two, you have to ask if you want to take a picture of him. Number three, once you've taken that picture, you have to thank him. And number four, you have to say goodbye or some kind of other pleasantry when you leave. I've heard of a fifth one that you have to pledge not to say anything offensive or to make fun of him, or basically essentially be nice to Robert. If any of these rules are broken, you risk the fear of dying, or you risk the dying, right? The curse of Robert is strong. If you break Robert's rules and then you leave, bad things happen to you. Bad things such as getting into a car accident, getting into having something stolen from you, losing plane tickets, missing planes out of Key West, your boat sinking, someone getting into an inexplicable accident. And these curses kind of intensify, and they get, as time goes by, they get worse. And what has happened to people because of this gets ratcheted up. But a lot of it is documented, because if you go to see Robert and he's in his little case, all around him are letters from people who have had something bad happen to them, and they have paid the price. And the only way to get this curse lifted is to write an apology letter. So there are all of these letters. Some are thank yous, but the majority of them surrounding him are, I'm sorry, I left and I missed my plane and I missed my mother's wedding, or my brother's wedding, and now he won't ever talk to me again, so please make it better. Or I got into a car accident, I'm sorry I made fun of you, I'm sorry that, and it's kind of this thing, right? And of course, as time goes by, when I originally heard the story, there was one letter of a president on the back. Like, one of those letters was from a president. It has since grown to 4 letters from a president, and everyone claims that their number that they know of is the real number. And that's kind of the essence of Robert, right? The essence of Robert is, I wrote in the description, I use this phrase all the time, all literature is a representation of the life and times during which it was written. All my students know that, right? All Robert stories are a representation of the life and times during which they're told. In all actuality, the doll was probably, most likely, a gift from his grandfather. There was probably no Haitian or Bahamian or Creole or witch housekeeper who put a curse on the doll. What is Robert wearing? Well, the going story is that Robert actually is wearing one of Jean's outfits. Like, Jean immediately got his doll naked and put his own clothes on it. That's how obsessed he was. More than likely, it's the outfit that came with the doll itself. But once again, there's where the beauty of this story is. Everyone has their own version of that story that they want to tell. The pictures. So here's one of the things I experienced. So the first time I ever met Robert was in 2008 when he was brought to Clearwater for TapsCon. And Matt Moniz and Peter Robbins asked me to kind of come along. I had just... no, he's wearing a sailor outfit. The sailor outfit is... The twist is whether or not it was Eugene's or whether it came with the doll. Sorry, I'm interacting with I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of little comments that I'm interacting with tonight. So if you're listening to this on podcast, you'll just have to go with the flow. Brought to TapsCon. I don't even know if I should tell this full story. And it was, he was treated like a god. And I had no idea who he was, which I think is something that is going to become more important as we continue this discussion. I had no idea who he was. All I knew is that I was maybe like 15 feet away from this doll, which I assumed was a haunted doll. Because if you see a doll, he's in a case, everyone's excited, it's got to be a haunted doll. Didn't know how famous he was, but I did know that all day people were coming up to me asking me to take pictures. And I would take a picture, and then they would come running back to me laughing their asses off and say, okay, now ask to take the picture before you take it. And so I'd say, okay, can I take this picture? No, you got to say his name. Okay, Robert, may I take this picture, please? And then and of course, the deal is that if you don't do that, then you don't get a clear picture. One of the things I discovered when I went there in 2011 for my 10th wedding anniversary was that everyone was extremely excited. You would get in there and everyone snapping away. He's encased in plexiglass, right? So at that time it was plexiglass. Of course, your pictures aren't going to turn out, right? You're excited. There's 1,000 people with you, or more like, a dozen people at least with you. You're all excited, taking pictures, snapping it from every angle, taking a picture into a reflective surface, and then you look at your picture and you're surprised that it doesn't come out. Then you kind of get into the whole spirit of things. You ask, you're calmed down, you've settled, and you take a picture and it comes out clearer. I'll be honest with you. Some of the pictures that I took, and I asked for all the pictures I took, some of the pictures I took of Robert for this book, I still use today because they are really ridiculously clear through the glass. But I was in mode. And one of the things that I noticed when we were there that day is that everyone was getting into it. Everyone was kind of plateaued with these little spikes of excitement as the tour kind of went through Key West and everything. And then when they got to Robert, that's kind of was the selling point. Everyone was given little ghost meters. Everyone was flying them around like this, going, oh my God, the lights are going off, right? Because they didn't know how to use that equipment properly. And it was a fun old time. And then everyone went on their way. And that tour cost those people at that time, I think $20. Might have been 25. I didn't pay for it because I happened to have talked my way onto the tour and to see Robert by telling them that I was writing a book and that I worked for Ghost Village at the time and blah, blah, blah. I would review their tour. And so they kind of gave my wife at the time and I a free ride, literally. If there's any part of that story that doesn't make sense to you, all you do is revise it. All you do is come up with another version of it. What is Robert? Is there some kind of possession going on? Is there some kind of, whether it's the voodoo spirit from the housekeeper that probably didn't exist? Is there a curse on him somehow? Is there the spirit of someone who died in the house or someone who died? Key West is an extremely haunted place. Did one of these hauntings attach themselves to this doll? Is whatever Robert might be, and I'm allowing for the fact right now, or the idea right now, that Robert is indeed haunted, that there is indeed paranormal activity that is attached to him, which I think is also a leap, by the way. Could it be some kind of thought form, some kind of tulpa? I would argue some kind of golem more than anything like that, where Gene's obsession with this doll actually put some kind of juice into it, like some part of who he was or his soul or whatever transferred itself into the doll, and so therefore it is a spirit of their own making, a tulpa, right? A thought form that, for some reason, probably because of the attention it gets, is cycling through and through and through, right? There's no end to the energy. There's no end to the thought form, because people are still putting their crap onto the doll. They're still giving it the juice it needs, the attention it needs, the notoriety that it seeks. It's continuing to keep the Robert flame alive, and so Robert is just continuing to feed off this. Could it be, and this is where the golem part of it comes in, although I think it's even a bigger idea than this, could it be that Gene himself and all of his little boy badness, he just became into the habit of passing things off, of blaming Robert for this, blaming Robert for that, the bad parts of this kid went into it. And all of a sudden, you get older and you get older, those bad thoughts start to be more sexual in nature, more intense. You start hitting puberty, and then all of a sudden, you're putting more and more of those things into Robert and less on you. And then the legend continues. And I guess the ultimate question is, do we care? Like, if we had an ability to create or to somehow discover what Robert actually is he real? Is he fake? What's the reason for it? What can he actually do? I think it would ruin it. We don't want to really know it, because otherwise Robert is what we want him to be. I believe in thought forms. Boom, he's a thought form. I believe in curses. I dig my curses. Boom, he's the product of a curse. So because he's such an easy blank sheet, the legend of what's going on continues to grow, and what you've heard and the rumors that you've heard and the things that people have said about it, whether it's in a whisper or not, become fact. And your fact, whether it clashes with another one, doesn't really matter, because people will ignore what you've said and they'll just find the story that they like the best. So I was looking at haunted objects as I was prepping this episode. And one of the things I noticed, first of all, I was wondering where I got the story, because I want to know how far back the stories and the exposure to the media for Robert goes, right? Like, if we're trying to create a timeline, forget the timeline of when things in his life happened, right? We have those. We have that Gene died in 1974. The house was sold at that point. It was owned for 20 years. He was then given. We know the timelines. We know those dates. What I'm concerned with is, when did he become popular? So, knowing my crack research, which sometimes seems like research I've done on crack, I consulted Haunted Objects, because I wanted to know, where did I get my Robert information? I immediately went to the back, and what did I discover? But this book has no bibliography. And you know what I always say, never trust a nonfiction book without a bibliography. So I'm trying to recapture Where did I get this information from? And I know some of it had to be from the internet. Now, this book was published in 2012, right? Oh, look at that. That's cute. So the story had to have been popular enough by then that it was on the internet. I had my encounter in 2008. So let's take by 2008, Robert is popular. Popular enough that people outside of Florida, outside of Key West, and that Clearwater event was the first time Robert had ever left Key West. That Clearwater event, 2008, he was popular enough that people were gravitating towards him. When did he get popular before then? Because what I can't find is this. I can't find haunted legend books or collections of Florida ghost stories or weird stories. Now, I've got literally dozens of these books, and I checked through them. I can't find a reference to Robert the Doll before 2008. I know it's out there somewhere. This is the tripping on legends part where I'm hoping someone will be able to tell me a reference to Robert the Doll before 2008, because I don't think there was much out there before then. That's the controversial part. 2012, David Sloan publishes Ghosts of Key West, which I believe focuses on it. He publishes Robert the Doll in 2014. So we've already established by then Balzano's gotten a hold of him. And once Balzano and Weisberg have gotten a hold, then you got it. And then Haunted Key West. These are all by David Sloan. Now, I'm pretty sure that David Sloan is now the caretaker of Robert the Doll. Della is actually saying that her parents actually knew about it. Yes, David Sloan. Her parents actually knew about it in the 60s, and he was popular back then. I wish we could bring Della in, because I would like to know whether or not it was this kind of mystique about him, because it doesn't seem to me. I'm talking 1974 is when the new family moves in, that these stories start to kind of flow around. Kristen's also saying that she has a David Sloan book pre-2000 that also features it, or in 2000. So the book is published before 2000 that features it. I was not able, I went through all of his books. I could not figure out if he had published any of these books and then republished them. So I was going by the dates that I had there. I would love to sit Della down and ask her what people were saying in the 1960s about this story. Because my feeling is, and if David Sloan wrote before 2000, what he wrote in that pre-2000 book, I think that there's a lot of misinformation that people have copy and pasted and copy and pasted and copy and pasted, and he's evolved. For example, the official Robert the Doll website now, which is the only place where you can actually schedule your experience with Robert the Doll. But I'll get to that in a moment. That website has an entire story about Robert himself assaulting Jean, right? And that there were several times where Robert the Doll actually tried to kill Jean. Once again, that to me, that's a new story to me. I've never heard that, right? Like I said, the people on the tour in 2008 or 2011, told me that story about the little girl. I have not read that story of the little girl previous to that anywhere. And post that, the only reference I found of that was in my book until recently. One of the big stories, and I think this is reverse. I don't think that it works this way. One of the big stories is that Child's Play is based on Robert the Doll. And that's something that's been pushed out for at least the last 10 years. By the way, if Robert the Doll was this huge phenomenon, it is not covered in Weird Florida. So again, I'm not saying Weird Florida. We've talked about the research behind some of that, and we've talked about some of the mistakes that are in it. But it is, if Robert was the most popular ghost story in Key West, if not in all of Florida, why is he not mentioned in the book? Book dates to 2005. I enjoyed the ghost tour. I enjoy all of these stories. I think that all of these are amazing, and they should all be celebrated. But I think that it's kind of interesting and kind of important to look at that. Della, I can't accept your phone call because I actually have my other phone running for Instagram, so I can't take your call. But I would love to maybe have this a discussion with you and cut it into the audio of the episode. Child's Play comes out in 1988. So in 1988, we're talking about halfway to the private ownership of Robert the Doll. So Myrtle Rester is the person who bought the house. So we're about halfway between in her tenure as the guardian of Robert. I don't think the story's popular then. There's some evidence to the contrary. We're going to go with it. It's pushed out time and time again that the writers of the story and the director of the story had heard about Robert, and so they decided to make a doll movie. First of all, doll movies are not new. In 1988, they were not new, right? This idea of a haunted doll. I mean, I remember one of my earliest horror story memories is watching The Magician with Hannibal Lecter himself and being absolutely freaked out. And of course, that was a mannequin, not a mannequin. I can't believe I can't think of what it is, what that's called. Ventriloquist dummy, but still, it was popular. If you go now, to me, there is no Bible like IMDb. If you go to IMDb, they say, right, the writers and the directors say that the inspiration was My Buddy, obviously, and then Corky the doll. And these were both like interactive type dolls. My Buddy was not interactive, but he physically looked a lot like him. And originally the doll was called Buddy until they realized that there was going to be an issue with that, and they went about it. They decided to. Originally, the movie was not supposed to be really a horror movie. It was supposed to be a satire on like commercialism and these dolls raising our kids and like becoming their friends, and people, wanting to be friends with the doll more than they wanted to be friends with real people, and kind of how the mom would she was working and her husband had died, and so she rather than spending time with her kids, she was giving them a doll to do all this stuff. They also reference Amelia from the Trilogy of Terror. Now, I know that when we were doing our promotional tour for Haunted Objects, Dave Schrader asked us about this, and Tim and I both got this question wrong. The Zuni Warrior doll, if you've ever seen Trilogy of Terror, amazing movie, and that segment is one of the worst, and the woman is terrorized by this little doll that's trying to kill her, this little Indian doll that's trying to kill, not Indian, African doll that's possessed. Also, Talking Tina from the Twilight Zone episode, The Living Doll. There is no mention whatsoever of Chucky being inspired by Robert the Doll. But because those two things interact with each other so well, because there is a natural tendency to, if you have a haunted doll, and that haunted doll has a history, and that history predates it, then the things must have inspired each other, right? Only I would say the reverse is true because I don't remember hearing, and I'll follow up with Della on this. I don't remember hearing the story of the Voodoo Haitian priestess, practitioner, regardless of what Caribbean island she is claimed to be from, because they're all mentioned. I don't remember her being part of the story until after that, right? Even like kind of when I first started hearing about him, it was straight that, you know, there was something about his obsession that caused it. But Chucky, the serial killer, Charles Lee Manson, I can't remember his name. No, Charles Lee, whatever. He uses a Haitian curse to put his soul in the doll. Then all of a sudden, another doll gets a Haitian curse attached to it, a real life one, right? Life imitating art, which is then imitating life. Chucky has, people are talking about they've watched it on different TV shows and stuff like that. I don't remember ever, and I consumed all of that stuff. I don't remember him being on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. I don't remember him being on an episode of In Search of. So, and I did research on like documentaries on Robert the Doll, and I wasn't able to find anything before the 2000s. Now everyone's got their version of it, right? Every podcast has got it, things like that. There are a series of movies now based on, and I think we have Time Scramble, right? And I don't think it's a Mandela effect. I think he's become so much a part of our paranormal framework that we tend to place him in areas where he wasn't. Like, wait a minute, I'm pretty sure, wasn't he on That's Amazing? I think I remember him being, or wait a minute, I remember commercial for the thing, or I was on that ghost tour at this time, and I remember it being, I don't think that these stories come out until he gets moved. And then a lot of stuff gets kind of built after it. Some of this is confirmed by the owner of the artist house. So in 2017, as part of a holiday trip, Natalie and I went there. Like I said, you can get, if you go to the archives, you can get our Zero Miles as the Crow Flies, our exploration of some Key West legends. And we were kind of walking around because, you know, the people we were with were doing a lot of day drinking. And Natalie was like, we should go to the artist house. It's like only a few blocks away. And I was like, no, we should enjoy it. She's like, no, let's go. It's right there. Like, why would we not? And so we got there, and the guy said, you know, he didn't want anything to do with ghosts. He didn't want anything to do with Robert. We pretended that we were going to get married, and that we wanted to have our reception in the artist house because it was so beautiful. And so we kind of talked our way in. We smooth talked him. And then after a while, he finally was like, all right, I'll allow one of you guys in the attic. And so I was able to go up into the attic. And at that time, once again, this is like, I want to keep in mind that these are the stories people tell. He told us that we had been the first people not part of a film crew and not part of his crew that had been up in that attic since Robert had been moved. Added to the mystique of the story, right? I tell that story, and I know it's probably not true, but it adds to the whole story of it, right? Like this idea of being the first one to touch a legend. No one has been up. I know that I'm not the... But when I tell that story, people go, oh, I can't believe it. Fast forward to Ian. And we are on the road. We have no house. We're on the road. We're on the... we're in Ormond Beach, basically, because I'm doing a few shows on that side of Florida. And so we're staying in a hotel. And I convinced the kids to take off Impractical Jokers to watch anything else, right? Because they just wanted to watch Impractical Jokers. Whenever it's like they never put it on. I've never seen them watch it. As soon as we get into a hotel, they find Impractical Jokers, and then they won't shut it off. I finally convinced them, and I'm flicking through the channels, and there I see Jeff Belanger, and I stop because it's Jeff Belanger, right? And it's the Curse of Robert the Doll, 2022. There's another one called Curse of Robert the Doll that's a movie. This is a docudrama, and boy, is it a docudrama. So much of this documentary, and I'm going to say that the people I know who are involved, both Mark Muncy and Jeff Belanger, are in this documentary. Mark Muncy not credited in IMDb, though. What's up with that? And David Sloan, if David Sloan is the caretaker, also has a huge part in it and is not credited in IMDb. So let's get a campaign together to fix that. They're both talking about it, and now, I've been doing research into Robert the Doll for, at this point now, 20 years, right? Or, 14 years, 15 years. And I'm watching, and all of a sudden they start talking about there is an affair, and not only do they have an affair, they have a child together. And not only do they have a child together, but that child is sick. And Jean's father won't get the medical attention for this child needed because he doesn't want the affair to be revealed, and therefore the child dies, and that's how Robert becomes haunted. Robert is possessed or haunted by the ghost of Jean's illegitimate stepsister. And my mouth is on the floor because I have never heard this story before. Never. Now, once again, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying that this is the first time I'm ever hearing this version of the story, and it's amazing. Right? Like, how do you amp this story up? How can you reinvent Robert once again? Now it's a love affair that involves a love child never meant to be, right? And the greed, right? So now it becomes a class thing, right? Now it's the ghost is a reflection of the upper class not wanting to give the lower class medicine. Talk about haunted, screwed up love, right? I mean, you can make this shit up, right? But it's amazing. It's great because it adds this other wrinkle. I wonder how long it's going to take. So let's get our stopwatches out. How long it becomes before that story is now canon, right? 10 years? 10 years from now, no one will remember that in 2022 there was a documentary that put that information out there. Was it out there before then? I don't remember ever having heard it. Some people out here have bought some of the other Sloan books. Is it mentioned as part of the Robert story that there was an illegitimate child who possessed the doll? Seems like I would hear that somewhere along the line. Then the documentary pulls out Keza Davis, who is a psychic. I then did some research into her, and she seems like she's a kind of a psychic in residency for a lot of these different. She was on the Holzer Files. She's done a few different episodes. This show was called. It's an episode of a show called Shock Docs, which, as I can see, pretty much covers all the generic stuff. They've got an Amityville episode. They've got a. They like Florida. They've got a Flight 401 episode. So I totally have to take that one too because this one was so amazing. Excuse me. Keza Davis appears on that show. She appears on some other shows too. I am definitely not here to attack psychics. However, I will say this. Not only are psychics almost impossible to argue with, right? And I've had this conversation with a lot of my paranormal friends. Once a psychic says, for example, well, I reached out to the spirits here and they say this, you can't say that that's horse crap without saying that that person is horse crap. And who wants to attack somebody? Especially if it's someone who's respected or it's someone who you know, right? Like, never bring a knife to a fight with a psychic, right? Like, you can't argue with it, because it eventually becomes you have to either believe them or not believe them. But the other thing about psychics are this, and Kristen, you're going to love this part. Psychics are responsible for a absolutely amazing amount of haunted legends. Not hauntings, but haunted legends. Why is this happening? And then you dig deep, and then you find things, and you discover that 10 years ago, a psychic said that this is what was happening at that location, and it's been repeated and repeated so much that it just becomes lore. It becomes, the story. In this episode, Kaysa Davis talks to the spirits that are there, and she puts out new information as well. And I got my mind thinking how many stories I knew that the psychic is the person who has created the story, and that story has now become ingrained. Best example I can give. Bridgewater Triangle. What makes the Bridgewater Triangle such a crazy location? What could possibly ever stop the craziness from happening? Is there anything that we as mere mortals can do to stop the craziness in the Bridgewater Triangle? And unequivocally, just ask that talking head Christopher Balzano in the documentary about it. One of the theories that's out there is we must return the wampum belt, right? The wampum belt was taken from Anawan, supposedly at Anawan Rock, and it was given to Benjamin Church, and the story goes that if you give this belt back, which has been lost to history, no one knows where it is. If you give this belt back to the Wampanoag, all of the action, all of the bad stuff in the Bridgewater Triangle will stop. Where does that story come from? Now, if you ask most people who do Bridgewater Triangle research, they're going to tell you that that story comes from Charles Turek Robinson, right? And you say, okay, well, what book? And they say, oh, well, that's easy. That comes from the Ghost Files, right? New England Ghost Files. You are wrong on so many accounts, right? Not only is that the wampum belt never mentioned in that book, it's actually mentioned in the other book, which is Mysteries, Ghosts, Crimes, and Oddities, right? True New England Mysteries, Crimes, Ghosts, Oddities, where he has an entire chapter dedicated to the wampum belt and the story of the wampum belt. The word curse is never used. People directly say, according to Charles Robinson, the wampum belt curse, Instead, and people who do research in the triangle and do real research in the triangle know this, it was said in an article in the 1990s that people looking into what was going wrong brought a psychic into the forest, into Freetown, I believe, into Freetown. And she said, there's a wampum belt missing. Unless the wampum belt is returned, bad things will still happen. You need to go find the belt and bring it back. A random psychic said this. I don't even remember her name. I just remember the story because for the last 30 years, last 20 years at least, I've been hearing people talk about Charles Robinson wrote about the wampum belt needing to be returned if the Bridgewater Triangle. As a matter of fact, I want to say, and I've got several people out there that can correct me on this, There is no there's no word Bridgewater Triangle in a published book by Charles Robinson. He may have used the term. I have not read all of his articles in the Rehoboth paper. I don't think he never references. Now, I've talked to him, and I talked to him when he was alive, and he talked about the Bridgewater Triangle. It's not mentioned in any of his books. He did not embrace the Bridgewater Triangle. He did later. In his books, he never did. He never targeted towards that, and he never talked about a curse. But the psychic says it. And so when psychics now go into the artist's house and confirm, and I'm pretty sure, once again, someone can correct me on this, I'm pretty sure she's confirming the story that this other person is talking about. That story of the illegitimate child is going to become cemented. Why? When I went to do the tour, it was, I think, $25. Like I said, I didn't pay for it myself. We went around Key West. We got to the museum. We spent a little bit of time at Robert, and then we moved on. $25. Pretty good. I would have, honestly, right now, I'm pretty sure I looked it up, and they're charging $40. I'm not that it's not a bad tour, right? There are a lot of really good ghost stories they cover, and they had that finale of being able to spend time with Robert at the end. Not a bad way to spend your money. You can get it on Groupon for probably less. Now, they no longer have control over the tours. Their tour. And I read through as many of their pages and many of their descriptions. They say visit the home of Robert the Doll. Their tour is an hour long. There's no way that they can go to like the 83 places they say on their tour and also visit Robert the Doll. I'm pretty sure they do not visit Robert the Doll anymore. You cannot do that. However, you can get the Robert the Doll experience. $45 gets you an hour. You spend the first half hour touring the rest of the museum. Then you get to spend 25 minutes in the room with Robert. So slightly higher. Except for $85 a person, you can have extra time with Robert. And you get a ghost box, right? So I also want us to see how this has evolved from whatever the fun toy is to play in the paranormal, they are now using it with Robert, right? Because that's how they're selling it. And nothing is more interactive and more real feeling than a ghost box, right? They are loud, they are colorful, they are, they really kind of allow you to hear and see things. I'm not saying they're not a useful tool. I am not a science person. I am not a paranormal investigator. I'm talking about legends here, but it adds to the appeal. For $85 a person, you can spend 2 hours in the museum. The second hour, the lights go out. It doesn't say whether or not you actually get to spend. You actually get to spend time, like in the room with Robert, with the ghost box. One can only assume, seeing that's called the Robert the Doll experience, and it is the primary focus. The artist's house, which went from we don't talk about the ghosts only 4 years ago. 5 years ago, now is hailing itself as a potentially haunted B&B. We don't guarantee you'll have a paranormal experience, but people have had weird things happen, especially if you stay in this particular room. I want to show you something, and I'll post this picture. I want to show you, and Mark Muncie and I, we were at Spookala together. And, we both had the same idea. Robert is big business. I have this picture out so that people talk about Robert. People approach me and they want to do that. Then they, he's got a whole doll set up. People come all around. We're at Spook Alley. We've got tons of all of these things, people walking around dressed as like their favorite character. We've got Jason running around. We've got the guy who played Jeepers Creepers. We've got the Lost Boys guy up there playing saxophone, and people are stopping because they see his Robert the Doll, right? I want to show this picture because you're not going to see it anywhere else because it doesn't exist anymore. This was not at the Robert the Doll Experience. This was not at the museum. This was in every single shop in Key West that we went to in 2008. For those of you guys who can't see the picture, it is an entire section of the gift shop loaded with Robert the Doll stuff. I'll show the picture again. Robert the Doll keychains, Robert the Doll postcards, a list of Robert's rules, big versions of Robert the Doll, plenty of David Sloan's books, and this was in every single shop. Every single shop had a Robert the Doll section. So by 2008, he is big business. That business has been consolidated. When we went there in 2017, I had to search high and low for my Robert the Doll mug. I also got a Robert the Doll button that said Robert did it. I don't know where that is. I've lost it somewhere along the way. Money has moved the needle, which now we can say, right? 2023, we can see how the shock doc playing all of October, needing to get new people to watch. I know everything there is to know about him. I don't need any more Robert stuff. Bring something new, bring people in. And that's fine, right? Like, I have no problem. I literally write books. I've got no problem making money off the paranormal or, like, seeing that there's, like, a business end of this stuff. And Robert's big business, right? We can see that today. We can see that now. You're not going to have that memory 5 years from now. All you're going to have are the stories. Let's not forget our good friend Tomoki. Tomoki was invented to get people to come to the park. Timakua chief stealing the water of life, his wife raising up an army, big huge statue built to honor him, never existed. He was invented to get people to come to the park. In 5 years, we won't remember the money grab. We'll just remember the story, and another layer will be added to the mystique. The Battle of the Two Dolls, it's more than two dolls. We have the Robert we think we know and the Robert that other people we know. The other people know. No matter what you think, no matter what story you've heard, no matter what path you go down, when it comes to him, someone's going to tell you you're wrong. Someone's going to tell you you're right. But always someone's going to tell you their version of the story. And that's been my version of the story. If you leave with anything tonight, don't leave with any of the facts or the details or, this part was said wrong, that part was said wrong, I heard this, he got this date wrong. It's all amazing. It's all beautiful, right? Embrace that shit. Because it's all true, because we tell it. And Robert will continue to be the blank canvas that we need to put our worst fears, our childhood scares, our understanding of what a ghost is, our understanding of what a monster can be, what can make things go bump in the night. It's always Robert, because he's so flexible and he's so out of central casting that he'll always fit the bill. Go ahead.
Okay, well, my mom and my dad both worked for the Navy.
Yeah.
And they were in Key West during the 60s. My dad was actually in Key West before my mom. And he would walk around a lot. And when I was a little girl, he was telling me about Robert. Because he would describe how Robert would sit in the window on the top floor. And it was a certain window, and he used to describe it, and that Robert would be in that window. And he'd walk by going someplace, and Robert would be on one side of the window, kind of angled at a cat-a-corner, looking out. And then he'd come back by, headed back to where he was going, and Robert would be on the other side of the window, cat-a-cornered and angled differently.
And how much time would have passed?
Maybe an hour sometimes. Okay. Sometimes, you know.
And this was out of the attic window?
Yes.
Okay.
He said the highest floor. The highest window.
Okay.
And so all through from like 1962 to 1966, my dad was in Key West. And then he returned back to Key West 1968, and he was actually in Key West in 1974. Okay. He remembered, because he talked to me about the artist's, Eugene's funeral.
Oh, wow. So he actually, like, remembered the funeral happening?
Yes. That was the same year my grandfather died, and he's also buried down there.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's all right. That was before my time. But
yes, we all know you're younger than me, Della.
But, you know, it was a common occurrence. And a lot of his friends that also lived down there at the time and was in the Navy, moving around town or anything, if they passed by that house, they would always look to see where Robert was, to see how he was looking out. Sometimes he'd be looking dead out that window, like standing, like not at an angle all of a sudden and looking straight out, like straight on.
So my question is kind of this, because I don't think that the legend is new, right? I don't think that part of it. I think like the variant in terms of like, oh, it was a voodoo priestess, and that he tried to kill Gene, and that there was more maliciousness towards it, and like the amping up of the spooky side of him. Yes, seeing the doll from the window is completely creepy. Like that would freak me out, right? Like as a matter of fact, I'm making sure Ella's door is like locked, even though she's not in the house, because I don't want any of those stuffed animals getting me, right? But was it this monster that it is now? Was it like that he was a source of evil, like, or that there was curses and things like that? Or was it just there's a haunted doll looking down out the window?
I really think it's made more to be what it is. I think in the beginning it's just like, hey, look, there's a creepy doll, and why does it keep moving?
Right.
You know, and of course some of my dad's friends were like, you know, that weird old guy's moving that around. You know. And I think for my dad, because my dad's very much like me, it's like, you know what? Anything's possible.
Do you think that most people thought that it was more of like Gene is creepy and he's probably moving the doll himself rather than it's a ghost?
I think from sitting around growing up and listening to all of them talk, my mom, my dad, all their friends and stuff, it seemed very split down the middle.
Okay.
Half of them seemed to think he was crazy and he was moving the doll, and others were like, there's something really creepy about that doll.
The interesting thing is that nowadays the idea is he was totally creepy, and that's what made the doll become possessed. You know, like, so we split it. I guess hedge our bets is probably a better way of saying it. Like, we want to believe in the story of Robert so much that we've actually combined those two ideas to make the cause the effect.
Right. I could see that, but I'm going to throw something out at you.
Okay, go ahead. I'm open.
Okay, devil's advocate. I'm an artist, right?
Uh-huh.
And I am seen by being kind of creepy because I do produce creepy art.
Yeah.
Okay.
As you can tell from half the things that are on my wall. Go ahead.
I own 102 creepy, well, I don't think they're creepy. I think they're beautiful dolls. They're literally all around my house.
Okay, you just made yourself so much more creepy than you normally are, just so you know.
They're, I'm on bed rest right now, healing. There are these dolls they're in our bedroom. They're all female, but they're all here. There's some in this room. There's some in the living room. There's some in the family room. There's some in my art studio. There's some in each one of my daughter's rooms.
Now, first of all, what does John think about that? What does your husband think about that?
Well, he loves me, so he just gave up a long time ago and just kept buying me the dolls.
That's exactly how I was going to say it. Is it just one of the he tolerates it for the greater good? And then the second thing is like, if your obsession is with dolls, maybe you don't have enough to have them all be possessed, right? Like, in other words, it's not one doll that's like the focus of all of your energy and the focus of all of your love, and therefore none of them kind of get it.
But I've named all of them. They all have their specific place, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
I know it sounds crazy, but for me,
I don't think it is.
It seems very reasonable that Mr. Eugene named his doll, dressed his doll, and was like, "Here you go, let's go out on town."
You know,
I don't want to take my dolls out on the town. They need to stay here where they're protected and safe. But
okay, that's even weirder to say. but it is that idea. Like, we put our intentions into these dolls, right? Like, I was watching something. I don't know if it was a crime documentary, or it was about someone, and they said, like, they got dolls at a young age, and they, like, focused all their attention on how to be the best mom possible, and da-da-da. And it was like they were using the doll as a way to talk about how she was neglected, and she used this doll as a way to practice how she was going to be the perfect mother. And the same kind of thing, like, our stuffed animals are like that, you know, like, my son has my Bad News Bear. And I remember when my aunt threw the Bad News Bear out the window, I literally, and there was no physical damage, and I put a cast on him, and I put a little arm brace and a Band-Aid on his face, and I researched what would be an appropriate time before he would get better, before I took that stuff off. So we do put a lot of our intentions into it. We do put a lot of our love and attention into what these things are. And when we start naming them and stuff like that, that's the beginning of ritual, right? Of rituals that cast things into things or draw things in. So I have no doubt that a doll can become possessed or a doll can become a focus of a haunting.
I like to think of Robert in terms of maybe in a way of like my dad talked about it a lot. Kind of like the Velveteen Rabbit. Maybe Robert isn't a curse. Maybe it started out as something beautiful, but locking it in the attic made it a curse.
So, the documentary, which is one of the things I forgot to get into, the documentary really focuses on the wife and the relationship. Now, what I didn't say, because I didn't go into that difference of it, is that they actually didn't move straight back to Key West. She was a successful singer herself. They moved to New York for a few years. When they moved to Key West, she kind of gave up on her career as a singer, And it's kind of like this thing where the stories now all talk about how that's what led to the tension in the marriage. And that's what, that's why she grew more hatred for the doll. And the doll began to hate her. And that's how the doll switched from being this, positive thing into, that was somewhat mischievous, kind of like our Puckwudgies, more mischievous, into this evil thing was this deteriorating relationship between Robert and the wife. I think that it definitely could have been a situation where his love and his affection went into that, right? Mm-hmm. And then, and this is the angle I bring in haunted Florida love stories. What I talk about is love, and then the dark side of love is obsession.
Yes.
And how the two stories I cover in Key West are both cases of, I use Robert as a way to talk about the lighthouse. I know you know that because I know you've read Haunted Florida Love Stories dozens of times. Especially as you're laid up and sick, you're like, what am I going to do? Let's read Haunted Florida Love Stories again. That obsession is where it comes in. And when you start to push things out and focus, now you're getting into obsession, possession, all those kinds of things. Disagree with me? Feel free to get into contact with me. You can hit me up on any of our social medias. On Instagram, we're at Spooky Tripping. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And of course, the website is trippingonlegends.com. If you like this episode, feel free to go back into the archives. They're not all about me ranting. We actually do talk about legends and us having gone to different places and checking them out and bringing the story to you. So it's always good to get caught up and suggest some of your own. What are some legends in Florida that you've heard of that we have not yet covered in Tripping on Legends? And of course, if you've got an amazing cemetery story from your part of the world, I am still working on whistling past the cemetery and still soliciting anyone I possibly can for the freakish, weirdest cemetery story in their areas. For the absentee Ella, who's not on my right, and the absentee Deanna, who's not on my left, my name is Christopher Balzano, and here's hoping that all of your trips are legendary.